Really good comedy is often based on pretension. Pretending to be something that you're not. And the exquisite danger of being found out. And in England, I think in America to a certain extent, there are social divisions. Sometimes they're to do with money. They're being broken down now in society here. But the class system still exists. And Hyacinth is somebody who wants to be better than she is and wants to be thought of in higher society. And she doesn't quite make it. And her plans and her schemes to ascend in the social scale often get knocked on the head. But she comes back flying the flag. She's undaunted. Now that is the very stuff of comedy. And down the ages, you know, we've written very well about that. Malvolio, Shakespeare, Mrs. Malaprop, Sheridan's The Rivals. It's all there, a rich seam in England. What I like best about the Hyacinth monster is that she lived to fight another day. She was optimistic, and although, as I say, she slipped constantly on the banana skin, back she came. And she stood for standards too, not a bad thing. She wasn't going to let anything slip. And I like that. One has a lot of memories of absolutely cracking up with laughter in rehearsal. But of course you can't be doing that when you're on camera, so you get rid of that. But it was immensely enjoyable rehearsing and preparing these series. We had a wonderful time on what I think was my favourite episode, which was our adventure on the QE2. And we were on board for 5 days and looked after wonderfully well, living in the lap of luxury and working quite hard from early in the morning until the light gave late in the afternoon. And we used, of course, quite a few of the passengers. A letter went to each person in the cabins saying that the BBC was going to be filming for 5 days of their cruise, and that we hoped that they wouldn't be disturbed, that we may be in their way occasionally. The letter also said, if on Monday afternoon, July the whatever, you want to get into your evening clothes at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and come down to the ballroom and be part of the scene, please let us have your names. Well, of course, 250 people said yes. We only needed about 60 or 80 pairs. It was wonderful, wonderful, great fun. It's always fun when there's a physical side to comedy. I think it's called clowning, really, isn't it? And I was in very good shape. I mean, I didn't know at the beginning of the series of Keeping Up Appearances that there was going to be so much exercise needed. But it was part of the situation and the story so often. And I wanted to do as many of the physical exploits as I possibly could. There were 2 that I didn't do, and I'm not going to tell you what they were. But they were a little bit too dangerous. And also one was impractical from a point of view of having to wait until I was redressed, you know. But I was in good shape, I think. And those physical things, getting on the back of a lorry, grew out of the story. If they'd been appliqued onto the situation and not growing logically, because I do think comedy has to have its own logic for an audience to grasp it and go with it. If they'd not grown naturally out of the story that was being told, I probably would have not done them. It's rather uncomfortable making in a way to look back and think about a moment or a gathering awareness that I could make people laugh. And it came to me in school. And I cottoned on to this. I was carpeted many a time in front of the headmistress because I could disrupt a class in no time. And when the teacher turned round from the board, I would be the only one with a straight face. I mean, it was very reprehensible. And I remember finding out how easy it seemed to be. And I remember sometimes despising my fellow pupils who could be made to laugh so easily, who didn't have enough self-control. Now, I was surrounded by a wonderful cast in keeping up appearances, and no one more wonderful than the man who played my husband, because at the very beginning, there was very little in that text for him to go on. He made bricks without straw, in my opinion, and built, contrived a character that the whole world, of course, is sorry for, out of very little. And after a while, you see, a writer does watch what an actor is doing with a character, if there's a series, and begins to write for that character. And so the writer, Roy Clark, did pick up on various things. I suppose he picked up a little bit on the fact that I could tumble and get up again. But what Clive Swift, who is a classical actor, he spent 9 years with the Royal Shakespeare Company, what he mined out of that very spare text built up, I know, a wonderfully believable marriage relationship of a rather strange kind. Everyone looks at Clive and thinks, you know, why does he stay with this woman? But we had to discuss this and work this out for ourselves, because the writer gave us no inclination of his background. You don't hear anything really about his family. You hear about Hyacinth's family all the time, and they're there in the flesh. So we had to work that out. Also, the writer didn't tell us what kind of a job he did, and this was essential to know for the economy of the running of the household. What kind of a house did they live in? How was she able to afford really nice clothes and those hats? And he was a rather dull little man, very difficult to play dull little men very well. This was a great achievement. Oh, I do admire him. Part of that basic premise of the comedy was, of course, the dichotomy between one part of the family, the Slobs, the Onslow and Daisy characters, and that little tarty sister who lived with them, and this person who wanted to better herself and get out of that rut. And she'd done it to a certain extent, but she was reaching for the stars, really, socially. They were all wonderful, because you can't run a situation comedy just on one character. I think Hyacinth is the engine, that's the energy, the center, but there has to be input and contrast and tension with the others. They have to hold their own, and an audience has to know what kind of a world they belong to and how it clashes with the central character. And I think you got that, and they were all very experienced. Great joy. I mean, think of again, it wasn't in the script, but Judy Cornwall, who played Daisy, created this ridiculous child bride, you know, who adored Onslow, this great slob of a fellow. They were a delight. And a total contrast, you know, those scenes everybody used to enjoy watching because they let Hyacinth off the hook for a short time. You couldn't take that bombardment for too long. I wonder why Daisy idolised Onslow, because he had pretensions too. I mean, the funny thing about him was that he had intellectual pretensions. And they were both very plump people. I'm sure plump people find that they magnetise each other. I don't know. You don't often see a very thin person with a very plump person, do you? And they were the same shape. They adored eating. You see, those two neighbours were interesting. A sister and a brother sharing a house together. The brother a bit of a failure. The Josephine Tewson character next door, who was terrified of Hyacinth, also admired her in a way. But to expose herself to the requirements of behaving socially correctly absolutely terrified her. But I think she got some kind of excited kick out of that, in a way. There are people who love being sort of victims, aren't there? And I think she was a born victim. She brought a great deal to it, and a different kind of energy, a terrifying neurotic energy. Comedy comprises exquisite anticipation, if you get to know a character, for instance, in a situation comedy, and the audience get to know and are able to predict how this character might behave. But at the same time, there must be some tremendous surprise which hits the character, and then the joy, of course, for an audience is to see how this character copes with a crisis, with a danger, with something that comes at them out of left field. Now, there must be a structure to the presentation of that character. The familiarity that an audience feels with a character must be based on a knowledge that is built up. It can be done within 3 or 4 episodes, I think. And then the audience get to expect what that character's going to do, also what that character might be going to say. And this is where things like catchphrases come in. My particular catchphrase as Hyacinth, of course, was picking up the phone and announcing myself as Lady of the House speaking, which I understand a lot of middle-class ladies now use in their own homes. This is a very old device. It's an old music hall device. Wonderful stand-up comics of the old days, the music hall tradition in this country, which influenced me a great deal because I managed as a small girl to see some of the great, great music hall performers. They all had catchphrases, and you waited for them. You waited for them, and they would tease you and not bring it into the conversation until, you know, your patience was nearly giving out. And when it happened, it was just joyous. And it also bound people together. People use these phrases. I can get into a taxi and a man will throw something at me that I say as the character.